All right, today we're going to talk about my favorite side of the theater, which is acting. Some of you, when you think of actors, you think of glamorous celebrities in full sequined gowns walking the red carpet. Acting, in my experience, has been much less glamorous. When I was in touring theater, I got paid $100 a week, and I was staying in a rundown house and driving a crappy 16-passenger van. And when I was in outdoor theater, I lived in a tool shed and showered with six other, women. Of course, we had stalls, but it was not the glamorous lifestyle that a lot of people think of. And that's because I was an amateur actor. I was a beginning actor. If I had achieved fantastic success and gotten all the way to Broadway, then I would have enjoyed the glamorous lifestyle that represents only a very small portion of the acting community. I love that what an actor really does is sit by the phone and waits, because it's so true. Actors spend a great deal of their time trying to get a job, and being an actor is difficult because you're so reliant on everybody else. You need a director, you need other actors, you need a producer to hire you. You need a stage. It's not even your stage, it's someone else's stage. It's not an independent career choice. It's one that is just completely out of your control. And so it can be very difficult to sort of maintain that lifestyle where everything else, not even bringing up the idea of stage fright or how much fear is involved in being an actor. There's a famous Broadway phrase, which is nice work if you can get it, and you can get it if you try. And the point of that is that it's really hard in theater to get a job. There are not as many jobs out there as there are actors who want to fill those jobs. So it is stressful work. It is long hours. It is hard on your body. It is, at any moment something could go wrong on stage. And we talked about that earlier, how that's kind of the magic of theater, is that anything can happen. But for an actor, it's not uncommon to have nightmares where you imagine, oh, I'm naked on stage, or I forgot my whole script. And these actor nightmares are so common and so universal because there are so many fears around being an actor. Like I said, $100 a week, and a lot of actors don't even get paid the first 5 years that they're acting. They're doing community theater. They're spending long hours as apprentices in big companies unpaid. So it's not exactly, if you need money now, it's not exactly the job you want to get into. And perhaps the most brutal aspect of theater is how quick an understudy can go on. If you are in a large firm and you're the top of your business class, and you have, let's say, a health situation where you need to take off work, maybe maternity leave. If you're a CEO, then they give you paid leave and you come back when you can. Acting is much more cutthroat. Your understudy goes in the moment you cannot achieve or perform your duties, and if you don't perform, you don't get paid. When I was in children's theater, we had a dry season during testing, and even though we were on contract, they just didn't pay us because we didn't get any gigs. And part of an actor's responsibility is to maintain good health and maintain a certain stamina and physical dexterity so that you don't have to let your understudy go in. Another sort of unglamorous side of theater, if I haven't already sort of told you the underbelly of acting, is that your body is your instrument, and as such, your body is something that you can they can change. You can contract to be changed and alter your looks. I had really long hair, and I got cast in a 1930s production of Relative Values, and they wanted my hair to look like Julie Andrews, and they chopped it all off, and that was just part of my contract in that gig. Is they get to cut my hair, and vice versa. I don't get to cut my hair unless they say I can cut my hair. Right, and they can always give you a wig, which is much less harsh. Now, weight loss, if you look at, or weight gain, when I was doing that outdoor theater, part of the main character, he thought he was just a little too thick, and he said, I need you to lose 50 pounds or you have not fulfilled your contractual obligation. And he did. He lost 50 pounds and trimmed up for the topless role of Tecumseh being the lead Indian. But it's not unusual to feel for a director to say to your face, something as intimate and personal as your own body, to say, okay, well, I need you to get your mole removed or gain 20 pounds or lose 20 pounds. Your body is part of your art form, and so it can be a pretty harsh business when it comes to appearance. Demi Moore, besides toning up for G.I. Jane, she also shaved her head. If you've never watched that YouTube video, I'd encourage you to go watch it. Long, beautiful hair. I don't think, just took a razor to it and shaved it right off, which is incredibly brave. So there's basically two camps, two fields of thought in acting. And one is what's called outside acting for the purposes of this book. And that's where we focus on the physical body and the skill set involved in acting. So you would ask yourself, which word should I emphasize in a sentence? You would sit down with a pen and paper in the script and sort of underline the words that need emphasizing. Physical details, does this person have a limp? Does this person walk with their chest out, or does this person sway their hips? And you work from the outside in. Now, I kind of don't like my language there about doesn't emphasize the emotional, because our bodies are physiological. Our bodies are so tired to our emotions that when we smile, right, at someone, we actually can affect our mood by smiling. The opposite is true. If we hunch over and frown, that can physiologically affect our mood or the way that we feel. Our bodies are so intrinsically tied to our emotions. It's interesting to see how those two things interplay. But in general, they're not sitting down to say what emotional intensity do I need to get where. The outside approach has to do with the rhythm. Right? If you are performing something like Moliere, where you have rhyming couplets, how do you create that rhythm that is needed in order for it to have a dulcet tone? If we're doing Shakespeare, are you following the iambic pentameter, to be or not to be? That is the question, right? Not that emphasized on the rhythm. We don't want it to sound didactic, but how are you playing the technical vocal skills of articulation and resonance and projection. On the other hand, we have the outside approach, which is you start with your body, and then we have the inside approach. The inside approach is much more interested in emotion. That is where we are focusing on getting into the head of the character. So if you'll turn over with me to page 70 here, getting into their mind and trying to figure out why they are the way that they are and imagining. Stanislavski had a famous acting tool called the what if. What if I were living during Shakespearean times? What if I was in love with a boy who was forbidden fruit? What if I had no control over my own destiny? Okay, now I'm Juliet. I've stepped myself into her shoes imaginatively, and now I can feel how she might feel. I empathize with her so deeply because I understand who she is and what she wants. So Stanislavski, and we'll talk more about him in just a minute, but one of the inside approach trademarks is this idea that we draw on personal experience. So if I am relating to a sister, say I'm in Chekhov's Three Sisters, I would imagine that other sister as my personal sister, Jana McLean, right? I would look at that person and I would say, try to transpose my idea of that person, right, with my actual sister. Or maybe if I'm in a love scene, I think of my husband, right? And I would transpose and give that monologue to the person as if they were my husband. So we're going to talk a little bit about subtext beyond the lines, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So your big question, if you are an inside approach actor, is you're looking for the psychology. What's my motive? And we'll talk about this as we talk about how to create your characterization. What's my motivation? Why am I wearing what I wear today? Why am I behaving the way that I'm behaving? What do I want? And what am I willing to do in order to get what I want? So why do I speak the words that I speak, and why do I behave the way I do? So all of this is from Stan the Man, Stanislavski. He is a Russian man who focused on writing down the actor process. And I'm on the bottom of page 71 if you're following along in your book. The actor process, and how does the actor create a living character on stage? Now you have to understand the historical context of this. First of all, psychology has become very important in the turn of the century. So Stanislavski is approaching this through the eyes of Sigmund Freud, through the eyes of, how did you relate to your mother? That was sort of the fad at the time. The other new fad was democracy, and we're asking ourselves, what is the common man feeling, and how can we all unite together to tell this story? So those are two primary philosophies of Stanislavski that informed the method that he created. Down at the bottom there, we have his Russian ensemble. It was very important in Stanislavski's eyes that all of these actors work together and get away from the star mentality, or that any one person should grab the stage and grab the limelight. So he's very much interested in what's my motivation, how do I get what I want, but then primarily through how do I get that from other people. Because other people are usually who help me get what I want. So if I'm Juliet and I want Romeo, right, how do I persuade that nurse to give us some time alone? How do I persuade the priest to help me in devising this plan to fake my own death? So as you ask yourself, what do I want? You have to ask yourself, what can other people do to help me achieve what I want? And Stanislavski was misinterpreted, which is something that your book talks a lot about. He was speaking Russian, right? He didn't speak English, and so when people translated him, there was a lot lost in translation. For example, when America took on his works, we talked a lot about the emotions, but he actually believed a lot about memory and using your body in creating memories, and we'll talk more about that in just a moment. In the US, we call the Stanislavski method the method with a capital M, and if you've heard method acting, then that's who that is. And they bring up some greats. There was a wonderful movie put out recently about A Week with Marilyn, where they kind of document Marilyn Monroe's a week in England as she was shooting this movie and her method that she would kind of go through. But this is still really popular today. If you look at somebody like Ron Howard, they're still using these methodologies created by Stanislavski so long ago. He was very interested in ensemble. At the time that he was coming into popularity, it was really this star mentality, and Katharine Hepburn famously said, I do not want to join the group theater because I want to be a star. I don't want to share the limelight. I don't want to be part of an ensemble. I want to make it all on my own. And back in that day, Broadway, they would put your name on the marquee if you were the star, and you would go out to see these big names like Katharine Hepburn, and their name would be on the marquee, and he was trying to get away from that. He wanted everybody to work together. Now, this is one way that he kind of got in trouble, because this group mentality was sort of part of the communist ideals about the common man working together to create greatness, the proletariat and the importance of the proletariat. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Stanislavski liked the details, right? He was trying to create realism on stage. He wanted to portray life as it really is. So people would have cigarettes, people would scratch their nose if they wanted to scratch their nose. It was not this sort of presentationalism, jazz hands, very choreographed movement. It was much more laid back and relaxed. He believed, and rightly so, that you couldn't really express emotion unless you're relaxed. You can't really truly deeply experience emotion unless you're relaxed. I mean, you experience the emotions of jitters and fear and frustration, but the only way for you to really truly create your art is if you come at it from a relaxed place. There was a fascinating TV show a while back called Distraction, and they would, have someone try to remember their own name while they're picking up a piano, and they couldn't do it because there's so much exertion and tension there in lifting a piano that you forget something as simple as, who's the president of the United States right now. And because when your body is under physical stress, we often forget or can't concentrate. And he really believed that concentration and relaxation were the keys to good acting. So the group theater, let's save that for the next slide, the communist scare. So the group theater, all these actors, Elia Kazan, Stella Adler, Harold Clurman, they all in the 1930s got together and lived in a big house. Now, in that house, they worked together. They all created plays together. They shared food. They had everything in common. And this is something that later led to accusations about being communist. And some of them actually went, like Elia Kazan, went to communist meetings that were more like social gatherings than really propaganda or times to plot against the U.S. government. Now, it's important to say that communism was a real threat in America. We had Russian spies living in America trying to get knowledge of, the nuclear weapons, trying to send information back home, but they were a very small population. And if you know anything about McCarthyism and the big scare that we had in America, a lot of artists were accused of being communist, and then they were what's called blacklisted. They were not allowed to work. Now, that was a uniquely American punishment. No other government has ever done this, what's called blacklisting. And very famously, Elia Kazan, who was a founding member of the group theater, he named names. When McCarthy pulled him out of the HUAC committee, came forward and said, the House of Un-American Activities Committee pulled Elia Kazan forward and said, are you or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? He said, yes, I didn't really know what I was doing, but here are the other people who were part of the group theater who were communists. And he sold them down the river, and they had to then find ways to work outside of Hollywood because they were then blacklisted. So, very famously, when Elia Kazan has accepted awards for his directing, people have not stood up. He's been kind of protested as this political figure and a darker side of American history. So I know that's kind of a tangent there, but it's important to look at the good, the bad, and the ugly that happen in American theater. And remember that about our past, that we did have this House of Un-American Activities Committee, and that they did punish people and had this sort of witch hunt. And if you look at Arthur Miller's The Crucible, it was in protest of this House of Un-American Activities Committee. And it's funny, my grandfather, my mother's dad, actually was trying to get my mom to see that this House of Un-American Activities Committee was corrupt and that they were narrow-minded. And he is not by any means a communist, but he was just trying to sympathize and teach her. And then she got on the phone and told her boyfriend that her father was a communist, and he ran in. No, 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 no. Because there really was a lot of fear, a lot of phone tapping. If you look at J. Edgar Hoover and some of the, but I digress. Anyway, moving on. So a big part of acting from the inside is subtext. How do I use my body language? How do I use my words vaguely without coming out and saying it, right? If you, my grandmother, speaking of grandparents, would say, oh, you're so healthy or big boned, right? What does she really mean? You gained weight, but she just doesn't want to say fat because it's a harsh word. What do we say when someone has died? They're in a better place. They've passed on. We don't usually come out and say they're dead. The subtext is, using that vague language, but then also how do we use our body language to say what we really mean? So in this scene, I have two people flirting, right? And they could be talking about the weather. They could be talking about their hobbies, but what they're really doing is flirting. I used to have a scene that I would make my beginning acting students do in Three Sisters, and it's the whole time they're cold and they're shivering around a fireplace, but then in the next scene, if you've read the whole play, they run away together. So that scene is filled with flirtation and work, give and take, but in all actuality, if you've read the whole play, you know that. Otherwise, it just looks like they're talking about how cold it is in the room, right? So this is the most controversial side of the method, and that's what's called emotional recall or sense memory. So if I'm an actress on stage trying to work up tears, trying to work up raw emotion, Marlon Brando at the bottom of the staircase in Streetcar Named Desire yelling Stella, and we had a rise of playwrights there who wrote this raw emotion. So if I'm an actress trying to do that, one of the best ways for me to drum up that emotion is to think of a personal, painful memory. So if I was trying to work up tears, I might imagine a time when I was really, really sad. I might imagine my sister's face and imagine when she was crying with me. The reason I have a picture here of a kid sniffing a flower is because one of the best ways to recreate that emotion is to think of sensory memories. Was it cold? What smell did I smell? So, for example, if you've ever had a past boyfriend or girlfriend who wore certain cologne, right? Does that smell forever reminds you of that person? And that's because our body is tied to those memories. And a lot of us probably act out our daily life according to these, sense memories, deeply psychological attachments that we don't even think about. Why do you like unicorns so much? Well, maybe that reminds you of a good time in your life. Why do you really want a cookie? Maybe because your parents always associated cookies with rewards. These sense memory experiences, but there's a deeper side to the sense memory abuses. I had one of my favorite acting teachers, his brother died, and he knew that he was taking sense memory too far when the first thing he thought when he found out his brother had died is, I've got to remember what this feels like. He was so concerned with creating real emotion that he was devastating or using his really painful moments to do it, and it can be disastrous to your emotional health, so you just have to be careful about that dangerous imagination we talked about in Lecture 1. Emotional recall is still used. I still use it. Wonderful actresses like Meryl Streep still use it, but it is something that you have to be careful with, especially as a beginning actress, or especially as someone who's already borderline with their mental health issues. So psychological gesture. So when we talk about Stanislavski and the fact that he was misinterpreted, we're on page 75 here. Stanislavski was thought to have just been interested in raw emotion. He was thought to have just been interested in this emotional memory business. But he was actually, in his later works that didn't get translated into English much later, really interested in the outside approach. And what I was always taught the word psychological gesture, but in the book he uses the word physical action. So I want you to do a little experiment with me. I want you to take your hands and I want you to tighten them into fists and squeeze them really, really hard. Squeeze your fists, squeeze your fists. Use all of your strength. Now release those fists. Now, just through the physical action of squeezing your fists into tight little balls, that can actually create tension in your body and anger. So if you want to create anger, you can squeeze your fists, and that can drum up the emotion. The same is true of worry, right? Wringing your hands. If you were to sit and wring your hands for an extended period of time, that can create the physical angst in your body that you would otherwise not feel. So he talks about later on using your body to create emotion, and he uses some of this opera language about how to sing. So he's interested in the outside as well as the inside. So a big part of acting is reacting. In the moment of the play, when you're looking the other actor in the face, you need to make it feel fresh and new. It needs to feel like the very first time that you've ever done this. And part of that is this language we keep going back to about the sensory, right? There's a famous acting ritual where in the dark everybody takes their robes off and they have glow-in-the-dark paint, and you just smear paint on each other. And it's a notorious, I haven't ever done this acting exercise, I promise, but it's notorious because there's sort of that sense memory that has to go on in acting of discovery of the first time that we see this. What I would do with my acting students was what was called Alien Banquet, where they would have to try these foods they've never tried before, and experience them for the very first time. You know, have you ever had sushi? Have you ever tried it and tasted and felt the textures that you weren't expecting? It needs to feel, you need to react every time as if it was the very first time you've experienced that. And part of that is a really good actor, like an audience member, can suspend their disbelief. They can reimagine the authenticity of that first moment. So how do you respond, right? You need to both see it and feel it with your whole body. You know, if you're supposed to be out on the Arctic tundra, you really need to feel cold. How can you create that authentically for yourself? You need to create that sense of environment when the north wind blows through the cracks of the dilapidated house. So, one of the most immediate ideas of action reaction is stage combat, right? If I were facing you face to face and I was to raise my right hand up high and slap you across the face, then your head should go across your body in reaction to that. So if you have a good action reaction, when I slap you across the face, your face goes away from my hand and down to the ground. Now there's what's called anticipating. If I were not yet reached the plane of your face and you already turn your face down. Or there's delayed reaction, right? If you don't pick up your cue and I slap you across the face and then 5 seconds later you slap your face to the ground. So, you know, making sure that you're in the moment, you're timely, you're reacting as it truly is. So first, in order to be acting, you have to memorize your lines. It's the donkey work of theater, the ass work of theater, but you have got to sit down and learn those lines, learn those lines, learn those lines. And then you understand them so well that you know them backwards and forwards, and you've broken down every single moment. But then you have to authentically react in the moment. So you can't have told yourself that you're going to say the line a certain way. So for example, pretend that you and I are in an argument together and you have practiced. You have thought, oh, I'm going to be so melodramatic here and I'm going to yell back at her, how dare you give me a C in my test? Right now, imagine that we started the scene and you've got a live audience in front of you, and I create this quiet, still voice, this sort of, if you've ever seen Once Upon a Cuckoo's Nest, I've got sort of the Nurse Ratched voice going on. I'm sorry, but you did not do well on your test. And then if you burst out in reaction, I did not deserve to make a C, then you have not acted genuinely or honestly how you would act in the moment. You have practiced it in your mind so much that you have a certain way you wanted to say it, but it wasn't a logical reaction to the way that I said to you, because acting is a give and take. So even though you may have wanted to yell the line, if it's not meeting me where I am emotionally, then it's not an appropriate response. So sometimes we have to throw away those planned ways of saying something, and in lieu of kind of creating an improvisational or a living theater atmosphere. One of the most elusive aspects of theater is charisma. My mom loves this show, So You Think You Can Dance. And when it comes down to the final three contestants, they're all fabulous dancers. Why would you vote for one actor or one dancer over another dancer is often a charisma issue. They have it, they have the personality, they have the stage presence, they have a magical quality, and you don't really know how to put a pin on it or exactly how to describe it other than they just have it, right? And that's one of that charisma is something we can try to create, right, by being high energy, by coming into this space with a positive energy, but it's ultimately something that you either have it or you kind of don't. You look at somebody like Keanu Reeves, and I don't think he's a great actor, but he is traditionally a fantastic auditioner because he has so much energy. He has charisma. He has that magical it quality. So he keeps getting roles, even though a lot of people would agree that he's not the best actor. He has charisma, and so he keeps getting cast. So in the scheme of what it is to be particularly a musical theater artist, there are three aspects to any actor. There is how well they dance, how well they sing, and then what your book calls psychology. Right? So how well they dance, how well they sing. And so some of you have really good singing voices, so you would be, you would be over here, right? I am more of an actor than anything else, so I'm probably right about here. I'm more of a dancer than a singer, so I might be over here. Some of you don't feel as comfortable with the psychology or interpretation, but you're a great singer, right? So you might be over here. But a true triple threat, what they say in musical theater industry of triple threat, is someone who can sing, dance, and act. So if you go to a musical theater play and someone can't really dance, but they're a great singer, they're not truly a triple threat. So the first thing we're looking at here is your voice. We look at someone like James Earl Jones, who has a resonant, compelling, seductive, poetic voice, and they're hired often just because they have such fantastic vocal abilities. We know that those first Greek tragic actors were given awards just simply for having a good voice, a voice that is pleasant to listen to. But then we also look at people like Robin Williams, who do great accent work, right? You look at Aladdin and the Genie, and he does all of these vocal impressions, and he has such a range. He can speak really, really high and speak really, really low. And his vocal dexterity, and this is something that actors spend a lot of time working on. And one of the best things about vocal work too is it's a way to relax. So say you're having a really bad day. Your instinct sometime will be to take a nice big sigh, right? And just relieve some of that tension. If you look at a Lamaze class where pregnant women learn how to breathe in order to relieve pain. These natural sort of de-stressors can happen through breathing. Many world religions like Buddhism, right, the power of silence, and then also the power of just breathing and humming and relaxing. So when an actor studies the vocal patterns, of course they study diction and articulation and making sure that they're hitting all of their end consonants, but we also study voice to create, right, to do impressions, to do dialects, and we also study voice to relax. So then many actors in the virtuoso that he talks about in the book study movement, right, or dance, as we said in the triple threat. If I'm portraying Richard III, how am I going to limp for 2 hours without having to go to the chiropractor the next day? If I'm doing Broadway in this picture where they're doing chorus line, can I do a toe touch? Can I tap dance in this number? But then also psychological gesture, right? If I am supposed to play a flirty girl, can I have those subtle body languages? Can I have bat my eyes or flip my hip or flirt subtly, right? We use our body to express in all kinds of ways that are more subtle than dancing per se. And they can help to tell the story just as much as the script does. And also, I don't want you to be confused in your textbook. Virtuoso just means skills. It just means that you're a person who's one in a million who has really great skills, to quote Napoleon Dynamite. I know we've talked so flowery about theater that I just have to say for a moment that Noel Coward said acting is just say the lines and don't trip over the furniture. A third grader in a school play is acting. So it's not all of this magical, aura. He goes into this whole talk about the sacred monster or being closer to the gods, and that's all well, and I do think that it's an art, but it's also just not bumping into the furniture. Okay, speaking of the less glamorous life, auditioning. So if I were to go audition for a theater here in Nashville, like the Nashville Children's Theater, traditionally I'll have 2 minutes to prove myself. So I might do a minute of a more comic, upbeat, modern monologue, and then I would do a minute of something like Shakespeare. It's deeper, more painful, to show that I have both sides of that acting skill. It's very competitive. If you go to an audition, don't expect to shake hands with people or win friends and influence people. It can be very brutal. You walk into an audition and there are 20 other women who look exactly like you if it's a casting call. And you only have 2 minutes in the spotlight. It can be very disheartening to drive all the way across town or go all the way to New York, right? Just for 2 minutes in the spotlight, 2 minutes of showcase. But theater is very competitive and time is money. They have rented that space. They need to get you in and out as quick as possible. So if you're singing, there are usually 15 or 16 bars of music that they're going to ask you to sing, literally only a minute. And there's usually what's called a dance callback, where they'll show you a quick routine, right? Kickball change, pirouette. It's not a whole lot of choreography. It's just a real short sequence. They'll teach it to you maybe twice, they'll show it to you maybe twice, and then they expect you to turn around and perform it. It's very, very cutthroat. And a lot of you know these things now because of shows like American Idol. You've kind of seen the process and kind of how competitive it is. So if you, as an actor, want to find work, where do you look? Classified ads and regular old newspapers are a great place to start. The Nashville Scene is constantly posting what auditions are available and where you can get work, or the Tennessean, but the Tennessean you have to have a subscription. So another option, especially if you're in a bigger city or interested in commercial work, is getting an agent. Now, an agent, somebody walks up to you in the mall and says, "Oh, you should be a model, but you only have to give me $200 and I'll make you a model." That person is a scam artist. You need to punch them in the face and back away slowly, because an agent doesn't actually get paid until you get paid, right? They get paid for every gig, and they get traditionally, right, 10%, 20%, no more than that. So, an agent is just part of a person who's trying to help you get work. If they ask you for money up front, then they're probably scamming you, and you should, like I said, leave them alone. Another place to find an audition is at a regional audition. So Nashville has an audition in May. That's when their audition season is, and you can go in and audition for 20 theaters all at the same time, and they'll cast their plays for the entire year based on that one audition. So if you're a good auditioner and you nail that one audition, it's great, but the opposite is true. So the Southeastern Theater Conference is also another big audition central, and so is Straw Hat in New York City. So if you're interested in acting, those are just some names to Google. Getting into graduate school is ruthless. I was very fortunate to have gotten a scholarship. You look at Yale graduate school, right? 900 students auditioning for 16 positions, and that's just the odds. Can you imagine walking into a job interview and seeing 900 people there, knowing that there's only 16 jobs available? It's just a cutthroat, ruthless business. All right, so let's assume you've gotten the job, and now your job is to work through the rehearsal practice time. So if you are a basketball player, you'll go to practice. If you're an actor, you go to rehearsal, and that's where we rehearse and practice the play. So the first thing about rehearsal is that the director picks the play well in advance and has it all figured out before even an actor shows up, right? So during the rehearsal process, the director does what's called blocking. They tell you, okay, I want you to stand downstage next to the chair. You'll enter right from upstage left. They kind of walk you through where you're supposed to stand on stage. That's called blocking or staging. Then another thing that the director's usually interested in is rhythm and pacing, and we'll talk about this more when we talk about directing. But the actors have to be open. So in rehearsal, if you're doing like a repertory theater or professional theater, it's not unusual for those time blocks to be 8 hours long, right? In theater, we call it a 10 out of 12. Out of 12 hours, you're working for 10 of those hours. They can be long hours. It can be very physically grueling, so you have to be in shape. If you're in a repertory theater, you may rehearse at 4-hour blocks at a time. So I might come in at 10 and then leave at 2 and then come back at 4 and rehearse until 8. That was our schedule when I was working with Southern Rep. Community theaters, much more laid back for obvious reasons. They don't get paid to do what they do, so that's just 3 or 4 hours every night. And then a lot of university theaters will have comparable to the community theater. Many of them rehearse at night. Although Motlow, interestingly enough, has found it's scheduled like a regular class time. So if you're interested in taking a production class on the main campus, it's usually from like 1:30 to 3 on Mondays and Wednesdays, just like a regular class, which I think is fantastic because then you can go home at night and have a regular family or, feel normalcy. Don't I always have to sneak in a picture of myself in a production? This is Flaming Guns of the Purple Sage. I played a cowgirl. I love that show. So after you're through with the rehearsal time, which is usually about 2 months, some serious theaters will rehearse for a show for an entire year before it goes on, but most are 2 months. Most that are school productions are more like 3 or 4 months, but especially if it's a novice acting troupe. But when we get to performance, it's opening night. We're finally going to get this show on the road. One of the important things to remember is to do what you rehearsed. Perform it the way that you rehearsed it. I had an actor friend who was my height, and if you haven't met me, I'm pretty tall, but he was the only one that was my height, and he was such an improv-based actor that the night of the opening, he would stand on chairs or be completely on the other side of the room than what we rehearsed, and I learned very quickly to sort of adapt to the way that he wanted to perform. But in a general, you want to do what you rehearsed. You don't want to change a lot on opening night, if for no other reason because there's a light guy up there who's trying to follow you around and has practiced it a different way. Something that can happen on a show like Mousetrap. Mousetrap has been running in the West End in England for 50 years now? Probably 51 by the time you hear this lecture. As you do the same show, 8 performances a week, you can get really bored with it. You look at Broadway shows that run for years and years, The actors often quit the show just because they get so bored of playing it. They know the lines backwards and forwards. It's hard to get enthusiastic about it. And it's really a big problem in the theater. So they talk about in your textbook some ways that, actors would change lines or play practical jokes on each other. And that's not professional, but it does speak to how hard it can be to maintain that energy when you've been performing the show so many times. A good actor also knows how to use the audience energy. If it's a matinee and the audience is bored, then they may feel that and sort of speak a little louder or have a little more energy. And the opposite is true. If they're performing for a group full of children who are too loud, then maybe they sedate or use their voice to calm the audience. A good actor knows when to come in with their next line after a audience claps or laughs, right? They know how to feel out the audience in a give and take situation. And that can be, if you're a first time acting student and this is your first production, it can be sort of disorienting to hear the audience reactions. Somebody in the audience is a distinctive laugh. Maybe it's your mom or your friend, and they can kind of throw you off your game. So you have to be very diligent about reacting to the audience and giving them the benefit of the doubt and listening to them. So we're talking about observed reality. A good actress or actor is someone who is part of the real world, as it were. They're not just into the fake Broadway or Hollywood. They know what it's like to be a real person and live in the real world. Hamlet famously said, "Hold as it were a mirror up to nature." So in other words, you're showing people their own image on the stage. You can mimic how people actually talk in real life, how people actually move in real life. And so in order to be a good actress, you have to have earthy quality. You have to understand the real world and have watched it. Okay, finally, closing, and this isn't actually in your book, I just wanted to kind of give you a hint at this. Like I said, a lot of actors go from the stage into the screen, but they're very different things. Film is an exercise in stillness. In film, you're super close to the person you're talking to. If you've never noticed it when you watch a movie, think about it next time. You are nose to nose with that person. You have to act like that's completely normal because that's how it's filmed, is in a tighter shot when you're closer to the person. Stage, you have to flail your arms or give big reactions, whereas film is much more subtle. Just the raise of an eyebrow can mean something, whereas in theater, you have to use your entire body to point to the other side of the stage, particularly in a large theater house like TPAC. In film, you have to wait. And we talked about this a little bit last time, but you have to hurry up and wait. You have to sit there with a book for 2 or 3 hours, and they finally turn the light. The light's finally exactly right, and then you perform for 5 minutes, and then you have to hurry up and wait while all the other technicians get everything else set up. Whereas stage is much more immediate and spontaneous and in the moment. So those are just some differences between stage and screen, but overall they're very similar skills, and acting is acting. So once again, I feel like I've tried to squeeze my entire curriculum that I teach for an entire acting program into 1-hour lecture, but you have been patient and I really appreciate that. If you would go back and read the textbook and start thinking about your characterization that you're going to write for me over Jo Turner's Come and Gone. Thank you.